light ain't lit. All right. Hi, my name is Jim. You may have seen me on some other shows called The Radio Guy. Tonight I'm sitting in, I'm hosting a show for Frank Mahoney. You probably have seen Frank's show before called The Compleat Camcorder. And if you have, you probably recognize this, and this is Frank's main tool. You're not going to see Frank on camera tonight, but you will probably see his presence everywhere because he's sitting behind the controls, and everything that happens tonight is going to be under Frank's complete control. All right. So tonight I have a couple of guests. I have Fred Oerther and I have Patricia Gribble, and a couple of very interesting people. I've been chatting with them just briefly before we started rolling tape, and we're going to chat with the two of them and find out what exactly they are up to. They are doing sustainable farming, sustainable organic farming. So, Fred, welcome very much to the Compleat Camcorder. Patricia, welcome. And first of all, I'd like to ask each of you, Patricia, let's start with you, about how you got involved in sustainable organic farming.
How I got involved in organic farming. A couple of years ago, I felt that I needed to make the switch from my profession as instructor in psychology, and I think the stress of that job is really what got me thinking, looking around for other things to do, coupled with the birth of my son, who's 2 years old. And for me, I had my family farm was available since I'd moved here to Oregon, and when I started gravitating towards growing, the only way that I could really go was organic, because I had my son in my backpack, doing all of the work with me, and he still does pretty much hang out for most of my work out at the farm. And just the thought of messing with sprays or chemicals, it's not one of my favorite things to do, but when you've got a baby in tow who just likes to scavenge, and eat whatever looks edible.
Absolutely.
There couldn't have been any other way for me to do it.
What was your background, your earlier background, or was there anything in that brought you to organic farming?
Well, I come from, I guess, a long line of family involved in agriculture. The farm where I'm doing my growing was my grandparents' farm. My parents, my dad in particular, is an agricultural engineer, and so he specializes in designing dairy operations, and both of my brothers work with him now. So I have a pretty hefty, I guess, family background in farming.
I would be interested to know if they. I would imagine that your approach to farming is somewhat different from theirs, and I would be really interested to know if they support your approach.
Well, it is very different. My dad and brothers, they talk about dairy operations, that run 500, 1,000, 2,000, up to 6,000 head of cattle that they're milking, for instance. These are really huge commercial operations. When you contrast that to what we're doing on dragonfly farms, we've got maybe about 6,000 square feet right now in intensive truck farming, and about 10 acres in orchard fruits and berries. And it is difficult for my father to look at the small scale farming that we do and understand that it can be workable, sustainable. So there are some really big differences.
Okay.
he tries to be supportive, and I think he does a good job.
That's good. Fred, let's tell me a little bit how you came to organic farming.
Well, I'm a farm kid originally. I grew up on a dairy farm in southeastern Michigan, and so that was my background until I went off to college in 1955. I understood that I had to make some money. If I was going to farm, I had to have some money. So I took one of the traditional farm kid routes to making some money to get some money to buy a farm, which is what I did eventually. I practiced medicine for 7 years here in Portland at the end of about a 22-year stint in the academic professional field, and then I went back to farming.
You were a doctor?
Yes, I was, as a matter of fact, yeah.
Interesting.
Yes, I did that during the Vietnam War. I was a medical doctor in Vietnam. That was part of my background, part of my experience.
Wow, it sounds like many reincarnations ago.
It seems like it seems like another life. Yes.
Interesting. I believe, Fred, that we have some video of you actually working on your place, and I think that it's probably queued up right now. Perhaps we can switch to the video of Fred on his operation.
Did you already know that garlic is hot? Garlic is hot. And see those over there? Those are onions. But the rest here is garlic. See the difference between onions and garlic? The difference is that
Okay, well, that certainly was an interesting video segment that we just saw. Fred, how much land do you have under cultivation right now?
I have really a very small amount. I have about 3/4 of an acre, about 30,000 square feet that we have under cultivation, and the fertility of that soil has been built way up. I've added hundreds and hundreds of tons of organic material, composted material to that soil. One of the things about marketing the produce when you live close in a metropolitan area like this is that land is very expensive. So if you're going to be a successful farmer and make a living at it, you have to do it on very intensive acreage. You have to do it very intensively on small acreage because you can't afford big acreage in the city. Part of my background was as a farm kid growing up, watched my dad being squeezed out of the agricultural thing by the ever-enlarging quote commercial farms, unquote, agribusiness or industrial farming. And I knew 20 years ago when I started to get interested in this that I would have to go against that flow and go to small acreage, not to large acreage farming. The small acreage farming lends itself to organic the organic methods, and it also lends itself to local marketing. If you can grow fresh on a very intensively on a small acreage, you're not going to have time to distribute that widely nationally. You're not going to put on a pallet on a plane and send it off to Atlanta, for instance. You're going to try to sell food to your neighbors. I like the idea of that as a system. Local production, local consumption, and then mixing the organic technique in allows me to use a lot of what my neighbors call garbage. I use that in building up my soil, and we don't have to send it 120 miles east to throw it down a big hole. I like this idea as a very tightly run system that provides A, food, and B, garbage pickup.
Yeah. You know, Fred, a few years ago I was just thumbing through the paper, and it had a list of environmental hazards. And I was interested to find that in the top 3, I don't remember which was the top 2, it was either the use of chemicals in agriculture, or else it was chemicals in the workplace. But I do remember clearly that number 3 was chemicals in the food that we eat. And I don't mean BHA and BHT, I mean pesticides and herbicides still being in the food, even though we may wash them well. You know, it's interesting, when I was growing up, I'm sure when we were all growing up, the idea of technology, of chemistry and agriculture, it was creating a miracle of abundance that the United States was sharing with the rest of the world. It looks like that's not really working out, but there is this myth that in order to get abundant production agriculturally, you're going to have to fertilize. Is this not the case?
That's the impression, and it goes along with the bigger is better. The bigger is better crowd. Been 100 years of contraction in agriculture in this country. Fewer and fewer farms, and that's a common misconception that you have to use agricultural chemicals if you're going to survive. One of the things is that there's a difference between farming a forest floor and farming a desert. And when you farm a desert, yeah, you've got to irrigate, you've got to use chemical fertilizers. But if you're farming a forest floor, you don't need all of that, because all of that stuff is in place. The necessary food and the necessary balances to keep the pests from eating your crop are all in place.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You know, I can see that our conversation is going to be about a couple of things. One is going to be about the changes in that you're trying to bring about in the land, and the changes that you wish to bring about in the food that you're producing. Change as opposed to what we would normally get in the supermarket. But it's also interesting to me the changes that the land may be bringing about to you. And Patricia, I was just I'm interested to know if when you began with your endeavor of organic farming, do you remember there being any moments when you could see that this new life of leaving the world of academia, intense academia, the study of psychology, teaching psychology, and getting into organic farming, if you remember the moments that your new endeavor changed you?
Well, I think earlier you had asked me the question of when I became aware of it, because I believe it's been a slow process of change over the last couple of years, but I guess for me it was really the time when I firmly decided that I would no longer teach full-time or even anywhere close to part-time, but I just forced myself to go down to one class a week, and even had the gumption to tell them I only wanted to teach one night a week. And I think it was it was after I made that decision, and it was as I was driving home from that first class, it just hit me that for the first time I actually enjoyed teaching that class. And up until that point, I had been teaching course load schedules anywhere from 3 courses a term to 5 courses a term in one really crazy semester, and never really enjoying any of it. And I think I was not a very good instructor because of it. And something about that experience of, I believe I became aware as I was teaching, but it really solidified for me as I was driving home, and it's continued that way since.
That sounds great.
It was great.
What a different world this would be if everyone around us was enjoying what they were doing.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
That's really a great story. Fred, the last time I went into the store, I was going to make a salad, right? I was going to make a salad. I love tomatoes, you know, and of course they had tomatoes. They seem to always have tomatoes. But geez, I mean, I look at them and they're just like these red, round things. And I know that when I get them home and cut them open, they're just not going to taste the way they're supposed to taste. Where can I get, where will I be able to get the locally produced, organically grown produce?
It's hard to get good organically grown, locally grown tomatoes in December in Oregon, but not impossible. The consumer has to understand that fresh produce is seasonal, and agribusiness has gotten them accustomed to the idea that there is no season anymore. We can get tomatoes year-round, we can get broccoli year-round, and that's not the way the plants grow, and that's not the way local growers do it. It is possible to grow good tomatoes in February in Oregon, but this is a specialty item, and it's going to cost an awful lot of money. What we need is a wider market so that more growers will get into this, so that the price will come down. You could expect fresh cabbage this time of the year. I don't think you should expect fresh tomatoes unless you're willing to import them from the southern hemisphere.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Did you have anything that you wanted to say about that?
Oh, I guess, you know, just to add on to what Fred was saying about educating the consumers, I think that's one of the really the strongest points about supporting your local farmers market is that can just be a really good education, whatever month it is you're in, you know, June, July, August, just to come to learn, you know, what can be grown, what is seasonal. And I find it interesting to alter my cooking habits to reflect, you know, what it is that's being harvested locally right now, so that, for instance, my salads in winter look very different than my June salads, for instance, depending on, you know, the greens that, you know, the hardier greens that can withstand the cooler temperatures and that I can get to grow in my cold frames, you know, and I can get my icebergs or, you know, more tender lettuce in June. That way I appreciate my iceberg in June better somehow by not having it available year-round.
Very interesting. I think I would much rather have a good cabbage than a bad tomato, to be quite honest. Fred, you were, I still want to know where physically I can go to get this stuff. I mean, where do I go?
There's a couple of organic food stores. People's Co-op is one, Nature's is another. Mm-hmm. The Food Front, and what's the something Harvest? It's on Belmont. I can't think of the name, but Nature's and People's are where we buy things. Mm-hmm. But there is not a wintertime truck farmers market where you can come in and actually buy it directly from the producer. You still wind up dealing to a great extent with agribusiness when you deal with the stores. Mm-hmm. And I'm not putting the stores down. I'm not putting that system down, but I still like the idea of the producer selling directly to the consumer and cutting out, if you will, the middle person or persons. I believe more firmly than I did 20 years ago that the fresher the food is and the better the soil that the food is grown in, the better the food is for you to eat. Patricia talked about the stress of the lifestyle, and that stress is exaggerated by having a crappy diet. And it's my defensible proposition that most Americans eat a pretty crappy diet as well as having a pretty crappy lifestyle. That's why we have the 5 biggest diseases that kill us. Those are all diseases known to science to be the result of crappy diet on top of a crappy lifestyle. Stress. Stress is a crappy lifestyle.
You know, it's interesting that you bring in the concept of stress, and you were talking about the stress in your job, because I would imagine that under conventional agriculture and conventional technological, highly chemical agriculture, that the land itself is stressed, and I would imagine that that's one of the things that you're trying to deal with is the stress of the land. Patricia, how do you view? You were talking a little bit earlier, which in a very interesting way. Share with the audience how you view your farm.
Well, the image that I was describing earlier is our farm is just outside of Molalla, and we're pretty much surrounded by conventional or commercial growers. They're our neighbors. As I drive around those fields and compare it to what we're doing on Dragonfly Farm, the image that keeps coming to my mind when watching all those plowed under fields is that of a desert in these neighboring fields. And in a lot of ways, you know, the Willamette Valley is a very fertile place. The Molalla area is sometimes considered to be a very clayey kind of soil, not very good soil. When you look at my neighbors' farms, I can understand why you would think that it's not a very good soil. When they're plowing, you see huge boulders on top. But when you look at where we've been farming on Dragonfly Farms, which hasn't been farmed before, but has just been under a sod cover, the truth is the soil is very loamy, and the clay is there, but after just 1 year of no-till, no-plow farming, putting in 1 year's worth of organic matter, already you know, the soil is just beautiful to work with.
I'm interested. As you were painting that word picture, you're talking about the plowed fields that surround your place, and you're talking about no-till, no-plow farming. What would I see if I were to see your farm? I mean, how do you do this?
Well, I think some of the big differences are in our orchards, for instance, we allow a sod cover to remain around and under our trees, compared to our neighbors where they come in with a lot of herbicides to eliminate any weeds. Instead of spreading herbicides, I simply go in and mow and allow that sod cover, which keeps down erosion. It allows the worm population. It just allows a balance in my orchard. I also don't get a lot of mud when I want to drive in there to do some harvesting during the wet season or some work. As far as the fields that we do, either strip the sod off so that we can plant through, like for tomatoes or corn. I've been doing more a heavy hay mulch method. We're now moving, in addition to the hay mulch, to using compost. But a lot of what you see on my beds is hay, with plants growing up through. That hay keeps moisture in, it's coming down, it's disintegrating into my soil, adding to my soil. And I think that's a nice image. At the same time, I'm taking away, when I harvest my corn or my tomatoes, I'm simultaneously constantly adding, keeping the balance going. And it's a very different image. That desert image, what it says to me is that truly what my neighbors are sustaining right now is a sponge, a medium to hold chemicals. And they have to now keep adding chemicals in order to keep themselves going. And I find that very frightening. In defense of my commercial grower neighbors, they find it frightening as well. They feel very stuck and don't really know how to get out of the cycle that they're in.
Wow. Fred, describe your place. What would we see at your place?
Well, some pretty good-sized barn buildings. You'd see a small, what I call a laboratory garden, which is where I started on my raised beds in 1977, 78. And then in the back you would see a 30,000 square foot plot. You would see large piles of organic material. You'd see piles that were mostly green. You'd see piles that were green and brown. You'd see piles that were brown and black. You'd see piles that were all black. And on a cold morning, the whole place would be emitting water vapor. We make our own fog on our farm. And that's basically what you'd see. If you looked at, and I like the desert image because I use that also. You look at the edge of where I've been amending my soil, and it turns from green and black, it turns to brown and gray. And that's desert out there. The Willamette Valley has been turned into a desert. Although it's a temperate maritime desert, it is nonetheless a desert. It lacks trees. It almost lacks any type of significant foliage on it anymore.
Okay, by the way, Fred, I want to come back to what you were just saying, but I do want to tell our viewers that if anyone has a question that they would like to ask either Fred or Patricia, that you can do so by calling the number that's going to show up on your screen. If it's not there already, I see it is there, 727-5476. I'm going to give you just a few minutes, if you don't have a pencil and paper handy, to run and get that pencil and paper, because I'm sure that Fred and Patricia have some information that they would love to share with you if you have some questions for them. Fred and Patricia, one of the things that I've noticed in talking to you is the intimate relationship that you both have with your farm that is shown in so many ways. Not the least is that you're not talking in terms of acres, you're talking in terms of square feet. I mean, this is, you know, a small, intimate situation that you've got going on. I mean, it's rich in terms of what it's doing for you, and it's rich in terms of what it's doing for your produce. And Fred and Patricia, I want to tell you how much I enjoy talking to you, having you on the show, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again. And
all right, thank you very much. Thank you, Jim.
You bet. So this is Jim standing in for Frank Mahoney tonight, and I just want to say thank you for joining us, and I'll see you again.